What they want to do is try and get the sequencing right here. They want to try and make sure that Donald Trump doesn't make any big concessions before Russia agrees to a cessation of hostilities along the current battle line.
Now, of course, we are building up to Friday's blockbuster meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska. So today is Europe's last chance to bend the president's ear and get him batting for them. The Prime Minister will join the French President Emmanuel Macron, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and, of course, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky on a call with President Trump and JD Vance. To try to get inside their heads and understand what might be said on that call, we're joined by Nina Dos Santos, a former Europe editor who has quickly become one of our go-to specialists on European politics. Nina, good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
What levers do you expect these European leaders to pull later then?
Well, they have three key objectives going into this call with Donald Trump and JD Vance that, as you said there, Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, has hastily convened to make sure that Europe's voice is in some way maybe not present in the room when the US president meets in Alaska at the end of the week with the Russian president, but at least he will be in the back of their minds, or hopefully in the forefront of their minds, as will Ukraine, because neither the EU nor Ukraine have been invited to that key summit. On the one hand, what they want to do is try and get the sequencing right here. They want to try and make sure that Donald Trump doesn't make any big concessions before Russia agrees to a cessation of hostilities along the current battle lines. And that's why it's been so important for Russia over the last 24 hours to try and make further ground in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region. Second of all, also what they want to do is try and get some security guarantees for Ukraine and for Europe as a whole to make sure that if there's any territory that is ceded to Russia that was Ukrainian territory, that then doesn't become a launch pad for future attacks to grab the rest of Ukraine and then to start challenging NATO. And last but not least, what they want to do is be the last person to speak to the US president before he sits down with his Russian counterpart, because as we know, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, who you just mentioned there, have learnt this over the last year very keenly. The last person to speak to Donald Trump often can make an important impact before any future meetings.
Yes, and it seems that when they're in the room and just after, they seem to get on very well, and then it's just trying to keep him on message, or their message as they see it, afterwards. How do Starmer, Merz and Macron work together? Because they're quite a new trio, slightly odd trio, you know, one from the centre-left, one from the centre-right, one from a populist centrist party. But they do seem to meet a lot. Do they complement each other's skills?
I think they have been able to, yes, and the big draw here, the big changer in all of this has really been, on the one hand, having a British Prime Minister who's more pro-Europe and taken a less antagonistic view. He's also able to pitch the UK as a key ally in the world of defence, sort of that allows him to transcend all the animosity that surrounded the UK's relationship with the EU after Brexit. And also there's a new figure in the form of Friedrich Merz, this very tall, strident, straight-talking German Chancellor who has a much better relationship, let's face it, with the French President Emmanuel Macron than his predecessor Olaf Scholz had. He famously had a very difficult relationship, strained one, with Emmanuel Macron that often stymied the ability of Europe to respond to various challenges economically, but also, as we now know, in terms of shoring up Europe's defence. So they are an important tripartite group. Remember, there's also Poland that borders Ukraine and has been beefing up on security and has been very, very vocal and important as an extra party to EU affairs. So the tripartite relationship on an EU level between Poland, France and also Germany is crucial too. And you can see all of this reflected in the sequencing of the different phone calls that are going to be taking place before and around this important phone call that the German Chancellor suggested with Zelensky and Trump, a virtual one later on today. In the run-up to that, an hour or so before, we're also going to have EU members, at least 26 of them, their heads of state gathering with the NATO Secretary-General, Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister, who is another figure who's emerged as being able to forge a good relationship with Donald Trump, even if it's involved some sort of massaging of the ego and some might say allogenous behaviour, at least these are the types of figures who are able to get in the room, even virtually, and to some extent inside Donald Trump's mind, and to be able to sway his opinion a little bit.
And it's interesting to see how necessity, I suppose, breeds compromise and cooperation in terms of the UK's relationship with Europe, European leaders' relationships with each other. Those seemingly petty personal squabbles fall by the wayside when you feel that your security is under threat if you're dealing with a slightly unpredictable US administration. Thank you so much, Nina Dos Santos. We will look at this call later with great interest. That is Nina Dos Santos, the former Europe editor, who is now one of our go-to specialists on Europe.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good to see all of you here again today. On Friday morning, President Trump will travel across the country to Anchorage, Alaska, for a bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The brutal war between Russia and Ukraine broke out under Joe Biden's incompetent leadership. But President Trump is determined to try and end this war and stop the killing. This meeting came about because the president of Russia asked the president of the United States to meet through his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who, as you all know, traveled to Russia to have a conversation with Putin at his request. And so the president is agreeing to this meeting at the request of President Putin. And the goal of this meeting for the president is to walk away with a better understanding of how we can end this war. And the president said at this podium yesterday, when he joined all of you in the room, that he hopes in the future there can be a trilateral meeting with these three leaders to finally bring this conflict to an end. But this administration has really used every lever, has taken every measure to achieve peace through a diplomatic solution. And I think the president of the United States getting in the room with the president of Russia, sitting face to face rather than speaking over the telephone, will give this president the best indication of how to end this war and where this is headed.
Thanks so much, Caroline. We are learning that President Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky. I was curious if you can share any more details about their call, and did Zelensky give President Trump any red lines, any non-starters ahead of this summit on Friday?
Look, I don't want to reveal the private conversations between the president and President Zelensky, but what I can tell you is that the president has deep respect for all parties that are involved in this conflict and are trying to bring this conflict to an end. After Special Envoy Witkoff returned from his meeting with President Putin in Russia, his first phone call was to President Trump. And President Trump's first phone call was to President Zelensky and to our friends in Europe to keep everybody in the loop about where the United States can see moving the ball forward to end this conflict. And so we continue to be very much engaged with President Zelensky and the Ukrainians, but also our allies in Europe as well.
And then just one more for you. How does the president measure success coming out of this meeting? The president at times has suggested that Putin might be tapping him along. Is he prepared to walk out of this meeting if he senses that Putin is not serious about ending this war?
I think I just answered that question for you and what the goal and the expectation of the meeting is. And I won't jump ahead of any hypotheticals, and I'll leave it to the president to speak to all of you after the meeting, which I'm very confident he will.
Are you optimistic that a deal will emerge from this meeting, or is he simply going to listen?
I think this is a listening exercise for the president. Look, only one party that's involved in this war is going to be present. And so this is for the president to go and to get, again, a more firm and better understanding of how we can hopefully bring this war to an end. There were many sites discussed, but of course Alaska is a state within the United States of America, so the president is very honored and looks forward to hosting President Putin on American soil.
Last thing, is there a joint news conference plan, or will the president have a solo one? What sort of scheduling stuff?
Yeah, the mechanics and the scheduling, Steve, are still being ironed out. For Friday, we're working with our Russian counterparts to put those plans into action, and of course we'll keep you all apprised on the logistical details of Friday as soon as we get them. Charlie?
The president said at the podium yesterday twice that he was planning to go to Russia. Was that a verbal slip-up, or does he actually plan to go to Russia?
Perhaps there are plans in the future to travel to Russia, and on Friday the president will be meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, as you know. Look, right now the President of the United States has done more to end this war than his predecessor, Joe Biden, who allowed this war to take place. This war, don't forget, happened at the result of the weakness and the incompetence of the previous administration. And so the president inherited this conflict, and he is determined to end it. And it's a very complex and complicated situation. As for the details of the plans that have been kind of tossed back and forth, I won't get into those, and I will let the President of the United States discuss those plans with the President of Russia, with our European allies, and the President of Ukraine, Zelensky himself as well.
Is there a plan to meet with Putin one-on-one?
Yes, that's part of the plan. And as for the other mechanics and logistics, I will let our team speak to that when they're ironed out. Go ahead.
Caroline,
Yes.
so there's a lot of reports that ICE agents